Well, as we all try to make sense of what's happening now, we're also trying to look forward to figure out what's going to happen next, not just 1 or 3 or 6 months from now, but also next year. I want to bring in Warren Hatch. He is Good Judgment CEO, joining us from New York City. Good Judgment, a research firm that offers these kinds of forward-looking, a little bit more into the future forecast. Warren, thank you for joining us. And I want to start with what you are gathering, the forecast that you're gathering on GDP growth in particular, and what it could look like a year from now. What are you hearing?
Oh, thanks, Julie, for having me here today. And yeah, so we work with our clients in the private sector and in the government to quantify these uncertain events, like what's going to be happening with the recovery from here and what's the shape. And in the case of GDP, what our super forecasters, our panel of professional super forecasters are seeing is that the probability of a rapid recovery is quite low. That we're looking at a longer slog where a recovery back to prior levels is a couple of years away, and for this time next year to still see the economy down 10% from where it was.
Warren, it's Adam Shapiro, and I don't mean to throw water on this. I don't think you have to be a genius to figure out that this recovery is going to be a difficult one, but what is a super forecaster? What does that really mean? How do you pick who that individual is?
Well, and no problem having cold water. At this point, that's a pretty straightforward forecast, I think. It's not terribly objectionable. What we do, though, is we monitor in near real time all the new information that's going to be coming in. So every single day, the super forecasters have an opportunity to go in and review all the news, all the information that's going on in the world, and update their forecast. So this is a way to monitor in real time what the shape of the recovery is going to look like as the information changes, and also to be monitoring all the other kinds of questions that will be telling us about what kind of normal we're getting back to. So a month ago, when the CEO of Disney said, I don't have any projection when the theme parks in the U.S. will be reopening, he should have checked out our COVID dashboard. The super forecasters were favoring the second quarter for Magic Kingdom to reopen, and we just heard yesterday that it'll be July 11.
Warren, Rick Newman here. Since you're looking at a year, 2, 3 into the future, does it matter who the president is, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, or somebody else?
Well, that's a great question itself. We can have that as a conditional question. We'd love to pose it. What will GDP look like if the Democrat wins versus the Republican wins versus perhaps somebody else? I think at the moment, the recent events are just overwhelming who might be in the White House come next January. But as we get beyond that point, I think it's safe to say that who is in the White House will become more important. That's on a farther horizon, to be honest.
Warren, one of the other questions that you're examining is when we kind of reach critical mass for a vaccine, and that's presuming, of course, that a successful vaccine is discovered. But you examine the question of when we might get to 25 million doses. So that's more the production question. What are you hearing from your panel?
Well, and again, it's a longer slog, right? So when Anthony Fauci says it's quite possible to have a vaccine by the end of the year, what does that mean? Well, for the super forecasters, that means low single digits, 6-7% probability of that occurring. So not impossible, but pretty low. The probabilities are much higher for this time next year. And by the way, those probabilities are higher than where they were a few weeks ago because of some of the news that's been coming out with the vaccine development. But still, we're looking at another year for a widely distributed vaccine to be in the United States.
Warren, what does this mean then? I guess we're looking 2-3 years into the future. What does the world look like then? I mean, are we back more or less to normal pre-COVID kind of social standing and economic standing? Or is it still going to be this weird kind of nebulous idea that perhaps we'll be wearing masks and there'll be huge unemployment still?
Well, I think what we're seeing in the set of forecast questions that we've posed is that we're going to be getting back to a different normal. It'll be a slower pace of growth, but the markets seem to be discounting that already with some winners and losers that are taking shape. But what does that look like? Well, it looks like Disneyland will open, but it's going to be at a social distance. It's going to look like New York City schools will be reopening. That's a high probability in the autumn. But again, a social distance. And UCLA will also be opening, but it'll be a partial opening. Not everybody will be going back to in-person instruction, it looks like. There'll be some virtual as well. So we're going to be getting back, we're learning, we're going to be getting into a new rhythm as we have this long slog of a recovery ahead. And that's the base rate too, right? When there's a traumatic hit to the economy, whether it's the US or globally or what, there might be an initial pop, but it generally tends to be a long slog. And this is what super forecasters look for when they're making their forecasts, is what does the past tell us? Now, it's not a perfect fit. We've not had exactly this situation before, but we've had kind of similar situations that can be helpful as we think about we're going to get back to a normal. We're going to learn to adapt. We're going to learn to adjust. But the overall economic level that we saw in the start of the year, it's a few years away. Same thing with the unemployment rate, where the probability that we're going to be back below 6%, which is where it was at the start of the year, is in the low single digits. We're looking in the super forecasters view at a high probability of double digit on the mid-teens or thereabouts for the next year or two.
Well, Warren, the forecast I'm hoping that your folks are most right about is that one regarding New York City schools for purely selfish reasons. Warren Hatch is a CEO of Good Judgment. Thank you very much.